What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the JT Sports Podcast. I'm your host, JT. On this episode, I'm going to be giving out my AFC South Draft grades. Before you get into it, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on post notifications so you don't miss when we upload new content. Remember that we're not just a YouTube channel, we are a podcast. You can find this episode and all our other ones on Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get your podcast from. The JT Sports Podcast is available. Follow us on Instagram at JT Sports _ and on X at JT Sports __. If you have a question that you would like answered on a future episode, you can send them in the DMs on Instagram and on X. Once again, you can follow us there on Instagram at JT Sports _ and on X at JT Sports __. Before you get into it, here's a quick word from our partner, Mint Mobile. Does it piss you off how much you pay for your monthly phone bill? Why are you getting frustrated when our partner Mint Mobile has plans as low as $15 a month that give you unlimited talk and text on the nation's largest 5G network? Stop getting frustrated with how much you spend on your monthly phone bill and go to trymintmobile.com/JTsports in description and pinned comment down below to get access to premium wireless for only $15 a month. That's only $15 a month. Switching to Mint is easy. It only takes 15 minutes to do. If you're pissed off with how much you pay for your monthly phone bill, switch to Mint Mobile today and go to trymintmobile.com/JTsports in description and pin comment down below to get premium wireless for only $15 a month. Stop getting upset with how much you spend on your monthly phone bill and switch to Mint Mobile today. The Indianapolis Colts had a fantastic draft. You get edge rusher out of UCLA, Latu. He was my number one ranked pass rusher. I thought the Atlanta Falcons were going to take him 8th overall. When they passed on him at 8 for Michael Penix, I felt there were only two teams that Latu was just destined to go to. It was either going to be Indianapolis or Minnesota. And if Latu wasn't on the board for Indy with their first round pick, I was pretty confident that they were going to go that Alabama cornerback, Terrion Arnold, but he ends up falling to Philadelphia instead. But getting Latu is going to be such a big upgrade for Indianapolis. Their secondary was not that good. I think a good way you can help out a struggling young secondary is by having a really good pass rush up front. You already have DeForest Buckner. Kwity Paye is pretty good. All you need is another presence who can harass the quarterback, and you're going to get that out of Latu. This is somebody who gives me a lot of flashbacks to Jalen Phillips when he was coming out of Miami. They had a similar backstory. There were some medical concerns with Latu, and that was a big question with him coming into the first round this year. Some people thought there was a good chance he could maybe fall out of the first round due to the medical concerns, but I guess the medicals came back fine, and Indianapolis had enough confidence to invest the first rounder into him. This was probably the best pick that Indianapolis could have made if they weren't going to go corner. And then you get A.D. Mitchell in the second round without really having to give up too much. You just had to sit and stay patient. He was one of the best receivers in this draft. He was my 4th-ranked wide receiver behind the big three of Adunze, Neighbors, and MHJ. He is a really good route runner. He's dynamic with the ball in his hands. I felt that his Georgia tape was better than the tape that he put on display last year at Texas. He was way more explosive. I felt he looked like a way better deep threat when he was at Georgia than what he did at Texas. There are some character concerns with A.D. Mitchell. They say he has some personality problems with, his diabetes and whatnot. Don't know how true that is, but maybe that had a little bit of a factor in why he fell a little bit in the draft, because I thought there was no way that he was going to fall past Buffalo in the first round. They desperately needed a true number one. And although Keon Coleman is really good, A.D. Mitchell, I think that he is a much safer pick. And you pair him up with Josh Downs, Alex Pierce, and Michael Pittman. This is a really underrated group of wide receivers that Anthony Richardson is going to be throwing the football to. Now, with their next couple of picks after round 2, they went offensive line, and you can never go wrong with adding more depth on the offensive line. Indy already is really good at that position, but I'm never going to hold it against the team for continuing to invest in the most important part of building a winning football team, and that is in the trenches. If you're not good up front, you're not going to win a lot of games. And they got a lot of big maulers who are going to be able to come in, and if one guy goes down, still be able to give you pretty serviceable production. And down the road, these guys could develop into really good starters. The Indianapolis Colts are one of the best teams in the league when it comes to drafting and developing offensive linemen. With their first 5th round selection, they took Oregon State wide receiver Anthony Gold. He's undersized, but he's pretty agile, pretty elusive. I think he's a solid route runner. He isn't going to be more than just a slot guy to me, and possibly offer them a little bit of a look when it comes to return ability. But with him being 5'9", only 172 pounds, he's going to be very limited. And you already have Josh Downs there, who's going to get the majority of the targets at that slot position. So I don't really see Anthony Gold really getting on the field that much. I view this more as a special teams backup kind of selection. Same thing with Jalen Charles out of Mizzou. Decent safety who has some decent athletic traits. You know, I think he is pretty good in coverage, but I think he's more of a backup. And then you also go with a corner out of Marshall. You also got another edge rusher out of Oklahoma. I would have liked for Indianapolis to have spent that 5th round selection that they did on Anthony Gold and invested that into a cornerback, because cornerback still is a gaping concern for this team. They probably could have added a little bit more depth at linebacker. And I know you can't go wrong adding a cornerback in the safety. You know, you took 2 safeties in round 5. And, you know, you just overall need to work on your secondary. And I know that you just can't improve every weakness on your team in one draft, but I thought that they kind of should have invested a 5th rounder in the cornerback. That was just more of a need than, you know, taking another receiver. You already got A.D. Mitchell and Pittman, and you got Alex Pierce. You invested so much in the draft in the last couple of years at that position. I don't really think you needed a double dip. There's the potential that you could have maybe still drafted a cornerback in the 5th round who could have developed into a starter down the road. So I think that pick on Anthony Gold could have been a little bit better used, but I give them a B+. To me, this is so far the best draft in the AFC South. They addressed the majority of their needs, and, you know, they didn't reach, and they were able to come away with some of the better draft selections of this year's draft. So hats off to Indianapolis. Chris Ballard and them did a really good job this year. Another year, another subpar draft by Jacksonville Jaguars general manager Trent Baalke. I don't get how this dude still has a job. His draft classes have been some of the worst in the NFL. He's one of the worst GMs in the league when it comes to drafting. And his big problem is that after round 1, he makes a lot of reaches. And this year was no difference. I'm going to talk about Brian Thomas Jr. first before I get into the other picks. I have Brian Thomas Jr. mocked to Jacksonville for a while now. There were some rumors about how maybe they were going to attempt to trade up into the top 10 and maybe position themselves for one of the big 3, but I don't think you can go wrong with Brian Thomas Jr. I do think that he's a more riskier pick compared to the big 3 of this draft, because he does have some similarities that give me some Kevin White vibes. If you guys don't remember Kevin White, he was that wide receiver that went in the top 10 a few years ago by Chicago out of West Virginia, and, you know, he didn't do anything. And Brian Thomas Jr., while I do think that he's a way better player than Kevin White, he's a really good route runner. He has very good athleticism for his size. He ran like a 4.33 at the combine. My biggest issue for him is, you know, how consistent is he going to be when it comes to being able to get off press coverage? He didn't really struggle with that, but, you know, at times he could be a little bit inconsistent. You know, with Brian Thomas Jr., there's a lot to like, and I do think that he's going to turn into a really good player. He should be what we all thought Quentin Johnston would have been when he got drafted last year by the Chargers. But, there definitely is a little bit of risk involved when it comes to Brian Thomas Jr., but I still like the pick. It's the pick that I would have made, and it's the best pick that they made of the draft. And then once we get to Mason Smith in the second round, that's when I start to have a lot of concerns with this year's draft class by the Jacksonville Jaguars. Mason Smith, this was somebody at LSU that was highly touted coming out of high school, and he never lived up to his potential in college. So you can say that this is a high upside pick because if you can get Mason Smith in there and he ends up being a really good fit in your new defensive coordinator system, Ryan Nielsen, then this is definitely going to be one of the bigger steals of this draft because he definitely has potential to not just be a factor against the run, but he can be pretty decent at getting after the quarterback. Now, can he give you 9-8 sacks a year? No, but he can give you probably around 4 or 5, maybe 6 max, which is really good for interior defensive linemen. But there are injury problems or durability concerns with Mason Smith. And, I just don't know if it was worth it taking him this high, especially when you probably could have traded up and maybe gotten a guy like Johnny Newton or whatnot. And then you make another reach taking the safety out of Florida State and Jarrian Jones. He was projected by most draft scouts and analysts out there to be a 5th or 6th rounder. I get the Jaguars definitely want to add a little bit more in their safety room, but you could have took a cornerback in the 3rd round that could have been a starter. And looking at their current depth chart right now and how they plan to use him, he most likely is going to be a nickel corner. So he would have been better suited just leaving him at safety and you just going out there and getting a true cornerback and putting him at nickel. So I don't really understand this pick. I don't really think that you needed to take a safety this high. Like, your safeties that you started last year weren't too bad. And what you had right before the draft, that safety was pretty decent. You had Andrew Sisco, Antonio Johnson, Andrew Wingard. You got Darnell Savage, who's going to be playing nickel for you. So I don't really get the point of drafting Jarrian Jones. If you're going to draft a depth guy, you draft that in round 6, round 7. When you're in round 3, round 4, you still can find impact starters. They may not start for you day 1, but they can start for you within a year. So I hated that pick. Javon Foster, offensive tackle out of Mizzou. This was a decent pick. The Jaguars do have some concerns on the offensive line, and you could possibly move this dude to guard, and maybe he competes with Ezra Cleveland or maybe Brandon Sheriff, because Brandon Sheriff is getting up there in age. His play has declined for the last 2 years. And the Jaguars, I felt where they really went wrong in this draft is that you reach for a defensive lineman when this was an offensive-rich draft class. You could have got really good tackles, really good offensive guards, and the interior of the Jaguars' offensive line is still a major concern leaving the draft. And there's still a couple of big-name free agents who they could target to improve those areas, but I don't really think they're going to pull the trigger on signing those guys with the Trevor Lawrence extension pending. And, we saw Mitch Morse, he's decent, but he's nothing special. He's a middle-of-the-road center. Luke Fortner, he's not good. Ezra Cleveland is the best interior lineman they have, but, you still could have looked to get a little bit of a more quality backup behind them. It's just the Jaguars' offensive line, at least at offensive guard in that center, they still have a lot of work that needs to be done. And they still need some more corners. You took DeAndre Prince out of Ole Miss, and he's pretty solid. All right, I like this pick. This was a lot better than taking Jordan Jefferson and Jarrian Jones with your previous picks. But then once you draft him, you take another running back. You already got Tank Bigsby. You already got Dearness Johnson. Why the hell do you need to take a running back in the 5th round? And I get it that this is kind of viewed as a late round pick, but once you get to round 6 and 7, then it's okay to take a guy like Keelan Robinson. You feel me? But in round 5 and up, you can still find quality starters. You shouldn't just be aiming to find backups and depth pieces in the 5th round. If you're Jacksonville and cornerback is such a big need for you, probably could have took another cornerback in round 5. But invest in a running back that may not even touch the field at all with any even the second or third team, it just doesn't make no sense to me, bro. Like, Keelan Robinson is RB4 right now. I mean, he's going to be behind Tate Bigsby, Dearness Johnson. Hell, you got a UDFA and Lorenzo Lingard who I like more than Keelan Robinson. This was a really head-scratching drive by Trent Baalke in the front office of the Jacksonville Jaguars. You got a kicker out of Arkansas who isn't that good, kicking from further than 40 yards out. This is one of the worst drives of this year. Okay, I'm giving the Jacksonville Jaguars a D+. If you want to look at one of the worst drive classes in the league, look no further than Trent Baalke's drive class this year. It's just absolutely terrible. He reached for so many guys. A lot of these dudes I don't really see having a high ceiling, no better than, maybe a low-end starter. There just was a lot to be desired by Trent Baalke in this draft class for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Like, your interior offensive line still is a mess. You still need some more corners. D+, definitely earned. The Tennessee Titans, they had a really interesting draft, I'll say that. Okay, and I like their first two picks. You take J.C. Latham with your first round selection. He was the second ranked offensive tackle that I had in this class. He is a mauler. He's really athletic. He was an anchor at right tackle on that Alabama offensive line, and he should come in right away and give Will Levis, some really good protection wherever they choose to put him at. Now, ideally, they probably are going to put him at left tackle. He can play both right and left, and you're going to line him on the same side as Peter Skoronski. So the left side of your offensive line should be pretty good. Now, what are you going to do at right tackle? Is Dylan Runnett still going to be your guy, or are you going to maybe move Jalen Duncan to right tackle and have a Kent battle for that starting right tackle job? Daniel Brunskill, he's still not that good in my eyes. You probably could have took another guard in the later rounds, but when you think about J.C. Latham, this was a pick that was a safe one, and it's a guaranteed hit for the Tennessee Titans that you're at least going to get a left tackle that should be at least middle of the road or better. But I think J.C. Latham should end up turning out to be one of the better offensive tackle in the league. Then you get to T'Vondre Sweat, who they used their second round pick on. My problem with T'Vondre Sweat is more the character issues. All right, the potential definitely is there. He can be a train wreck or a chaos maker playing alongside of Jeffrey Simmons. Jeffrey Simmons is one of the best interior defensive linemen in the league when it comes to generating pressure on the quarterback. And T'Vondre Sweat, he has the potential to be a little bit similar to what Jeffrey Simmons is, even though I don't think he's the kind of athletic specimen that Jeffrey Simmons was when he was coming out of Mississippi State. But with his size and how well he is able to beat blockers, shed blocks, and affect the quarterback, I'm really excited to see what he's going to do paired up alongside of, one of the best interior D linemen in the game right now. And then after these first two picks, this is when I feel Rand Carthon and company started to go left. You get Cedric Gray in the fourth round at linebacker, which you do have a pretty big hole at linebacker. All right, you lost Azeez Al-Shire to free agency, and you got Kenneth Murray coming in, who up to this point in his career, he is a bust. Cedric Gray, he could compete for playing time, but I don't really know if this is somebody who is ready to start year one for you, who can give you decent play. I think if you throw him out there in the fire as a rookie, he could be more of a liability. And right now, just looking at the linebacker core for Tennessee, it's a lot to be desired. That's probably the biggest weakness that they have on their team at this moment. You got Jarvis Brownlee, really physical press corner out of Louisville. I like the pick. The only problem is that maybe instead of taking him, you could have taken another offensive lineman, because cornerback is a strength on your team. I mean, you're absolutely deep at corner. You got Caleb Farley. Yeah, he can't stay healthy, but you did sign Chidobe Awuzie. You got L'Jarius Sneed, who you just traded for. You got Roger McQuarrie in the slot. Was there really a need for Jarvis Brownlee? I felt like the depth when it comes to your backups at corner were already pretty good. I don't really think you needed to take a guy like Jarvis Brownlee in the 5th round. Maybe you could have took another O lineman, maybe invest in another linebacker or some more interior D linemen. It's just cornerback is just such a strength on your team that you really need to take one in the middle portion of the draft. You could have taken one in round 6 or 7. Then you get Jaquan Jackson, Tulane wide receiver, pretty good pick. You need to have some more bodies in that wide receiver room because, I mean, if one of your starters goes down, you're screwed. And then I really love the James Williams pick, safety out of Miami. He's long, rangy, moves pretty well for his size. And I'm a little biased because I am a Miami Hurricanes fan. I think this could turn out to be one of the biggest steals in the draft. All right, you look at James Williams and just how rangy he is. He's a little bit like Kyle Hamilton, but, not as close to as good as the player that Kyle Hamilton is. He's not as good in coverage. He could be a little bit better in run support. But if you sit him for a year, you let him develop. I believe that James Williams could turn into a really good safety. I think he can play either strong or free safety. The size, the length, the athleticism, it's all there. He just needs the right development. But overall, I think this draft class was, it was good. The first 2 picks they made, and then after that, it was just a mixed bag of guys who could be, low end starters, high end backups. It's just, I don't think they got a lot of value out of this draft once you look past their first 2 selections. So I give the Tennessee Titans a C+. And the last team that we have to talk about are the Houston Texans. The Houston Texans have had a really fantastic offseason. You get Stephon Diggs, you trade for Joe Mixon, and then the draft comes around. You trade out of the first round with the Minnesota Vikings. So what did you do with your first pick, which was a first rounder? You take Kamari Lassiter out of Georgia. This dude is a gem. I felt he was the most underrated, not talked about enough cornerback in this class. This dude is the definition of a shutdown corner. He's scheme versatile. He can play zone. He can play man coverage really well. But I think he's a fantastic man coverage corner. And I don't know where Houston is going to play him at. He can play outside. He can play in the slot. You signed Jeff Okudah. Jeff Okudah, maybe you experiment with him playing slot corner. I think maybe he would be better suited there than leaving him on the outside. And you let Kamari Lassiter play corner. Because I remember I first got hip to Kamari Lassiter, not this past season, but the season before last, when everybody was gassing up Kelee Ringo. And every time I was watching Kelee Ringo, he was always getting torched. Meanwhile, Kamari Lassiter was always the cornerback on the opposite side who was clamping shit up. And with the Miko Ryans, and you already have Derek Stingley, he's building one of the 3 best secondaries in the National Football League. I mean, Kamari Lassiter is a fantastic pick. This was one of my favorite picks from this draft. Then you get Blake Fisher in round 2. Really athletic offensive tackle who could start for you day 1. Maybe this means that it's, the beginning of the end for the days of Tytus Howard. But anytime you draft the offensive tackle out of Notre Dame, they're always a pretty safe bet to be pretty good. Kalen Bullock, safety out of USC. I was a little surprised to see him go this early. I thought he would be more of a round 4, the 6th guy, because he's not good when it comes to tackling, but he's phenomenal in coverage, and he has a knack for making plays. He always just seems to be in the right position to make a play on the football. Really good IQ. He's a instinctual player. USC's defense was terrible last year. It was a travesty, but he was one of the only few bright spots on that team. I don't know where they're going to play him at. You already got Jalen Petrie and Jimmy Ward. I don't know if you're going to play him in the slot. I don't know if he kind of has a skill set to play slot. But Kalen Bullock is a really good defensive back. He's really good in coverage. He's not going to give you much against the run. But if you can find a way to get him on the field and maybe you want to use him in single high sets, I think he'll be pretty good there. Like, Kalen Bullock is really good when it comes to coverage. Really good. It's just his run support is kind of non-existent. And then you get, in round 6, you get Jamal Hill, linebacker out of Oregon. He is fantastic in coverage. All right. He's going to be somebody that you leave in and nickel or dime packages to cover against tight ends or running backs coming out of the backfield. He's going to have a really good skill set for that. And he could turn into a really serviceable starter for the Houston Texans. You get Jahar Jordan out of Louisville. I don't know about this pick because you already got Joe Mixon, Gerard Jordan. Maybe he was somebody who you could have got as a UDFA. He's not somebody that does a lot after contact, but he is somebody who has quick acceleration. He can get from 0 to 100 really fast. There was a couple of games last year where he absolutely went off. At one point, he was on my Heisman watch list. It's just that, Dameon Pierce, I don't know what the hell happened to him, but maybe he bounces back this year. It's just, Gerard Jordan, he's a decent back. I think he'll be a pretty good fit with them running a lot of outside zone. But, in round 6, I guess it's not bad to take a running back in round 6. It's not too bad of a pick. Maybe I'm just being a little nitpicky here. And then their last couple of picks, they doubled up on the defensive line. You get Solomon Byrd, Marcus Harris out of Auburn. These are guys who, they look more like backups right now, but it never hurts to invest more on the interior of your defensive line. Then you get Ladarius Henderson, interior offensive lineman out of Michigan. Really tough, really physical, nasty guy up front. Could end up being a future starter at one of those guard positions. So I like that pick there. So I'm going to give the Houston Texans a B grade for their draft. I think they made the most with the picks that they had. I would have liked for them to maybe have gone with another offensive lineman, just to add a little bit more depth, since you look at how bad the offensive line was last year due to injuries. Never hurts to add a little bit more depth there. Yeah, they did take 2 of them, but you probably could have took 3, maybe passed on Gerard Jordan in round 6. But this was a pretty good draft by Nick Caserio, and I give it a B. And this is it for my 2024 AFC South draft grades. Leave your comments about my grades in the comment section down below. Do you agree with them? Do you disagree? Which ones were too high? Which ones were too low? I appreciate you guys for tuning in to this episode. Leave a like, subscribe, give us a 5-star review on Apple and Spotify if you enjoy. Follow us on our social media platforms. You can find us on Instagram at JTSports_ and on X at JTSports__. I appreciate you guys for listening, and I will see you guys shortly with another episode of the JT Sports Podcast.